clock in our front room had stopped at 20 minutes past 11, but I could still hear the loose metal pendulum tapping against the wood whenever the wind pushed through the wall. My wife sat on the edge of our bed with both hands folded in her lap. She did not look at me when she said it. She only said, "I cannot be your wife in that way anymore." I remember the cold of the floorboards under my bare feet. I remember the lamp flame bending toward the chimney glass. And I remember knowing that whatever I did next would follow us for the rest of our marriage. My name is Jonas. I am an Amish husband, a father, and the head of a household that has known good harvests, failed crops, births, funerals, and more quiet evenings than I could count. I tell these stories because people often imagine that a simple life is an easy life. It is not. It only gives you fewer places to hide from the choices you make. If you have ever had to choose between what you believed you were owed and what love required of you, I would be interested to hear what you learned. That night happened 19 years ago. My wife, Miriam, had been ill for months after the birth of our youngest daughter. The midwife said her body needed rest. The doctor in town used longer words, but the meaning was the same. She was exhausted, frightened, and carrying pain she did not know how to explain. In our community, private matters stay private. A husband does not speak freely about his marriage, and a wife does not complain about her husband. That silence can protect a household. It can also make two people feel very alone inside the same room. For the first weeks, I told myself Miriam only needed time. I took over the early milking and let her sleep past sunrise. I asked my sister to help with washing. I carried the baby after supper, while Miriam sat by the stove with a blanket over her shoulders. But as the weeks became months, she pulled farther away. She stopped sitting beside me at the table. She changed clothes behind the pantry door. At night, she would wait until I was asleep before lying down at the far edge of the mattress. I did not understand it. I felt rejected, and I was ashamed of how angry that made me. I had been raised to believe that marriage joined two people completely. I had also been raised to believe that a husband carried authority in the home. Those two ideas can become dangerous when a man thinks authority means he no longer has to listen. The morning after she told me she could not be my wife in that way anymore, I hitched the buggy before breakfast and drove to see our bishop. Frost covered the fence posts. The horse's breath rose white in front of us. I rehearsed the story all the way there, arranging the facts so I would sound patient and reasonable. I told myself I wanted guidance. The truth is, I wanted someone to tell Miriam she was wrong. The bishop was an older man named Eli. He had heavy hands, a gray beard, and a way of letting silence sit until a person heard his own words more clearly. We met in his workshop. There were curls of maple wood on the floor and the smell of linseed oil in the air. I told him my wife had refused me. I told him I had been patient. I told him a marriage could not continue that way. He listened without interrupting. Then he asked one question. "Is she afraid of you?" I answered too quickly. I said no. He looked at me for a long time, then said the only sentence from that conversation I have never forgotten. "A husband is not obeyed because his wife is afraid to say no." That was not the answer I had come for. I felt heat rise into my face. I reminded him of Scripture. I reminded him of order in the home. I spoke about duty, covenant, and the responsibilities of a wife. He let me finish. Then he asked whether I had come to preserve my marriage or to win an argument. I did not answer. He told me to go home and make it clear to Miriam that I would not force, threaten, shame, or pressure her. He told me to sleep in the small room beside the kitchen if that made her feel safe. He told me to keep providing, keep praying, keep speaking gently, and keep my private frustration from becoming her burden. He did not tell me how long. He did not promise she would change. He only said that obedience to God could not be separated from mercy toward the person closest to me. I obeyed him for 19 years. That sentence may sound simple. It was not. The small room had one narrow bed and a window that rattled during winter storms. For the first year, I slept there every night. I could hear Miriam walking with the baby in the room above me. I could hear the children coughing through the walls. Sometimes I lay awake angry at her. Sometimes I lay awake angry at the bishop. More than once, I thought about returning to him and demanding a different answer. But each morning there was work. Cows do not care whether a man feels rejected. A field does not wait for a marriage to become easier. I rose before 5, washed at the basin, and went to the barn. I learned that resentment can live beside responsibility for a very long time. A man can feed his family, repair a roof, lead prayer at the table, and still carry a hard heart into every room. Miriam and I spoke politely. That was almost worse than fighting. She thanked me for bringing in wood. I asked whether she needed flour from town. We discussed the children, the garden, and church visits. We did not discuss the distance between us. About 7 months after I moved into the small room, our oldest son became sick with a fever. For 3 nights, Miriam and I took turns sitting beside him. On the second night, I woke in the chair and found a quilt over my shoulders. Miriam had placed it there. She did not say anything about it the next morning. Neither did I. But it was the first kindness between us that did not feel like duty. That is how our marriage began to return. Not through one grand conversation, through small acts that asked for nothing in return. I repaired the latch on her sewing cabinet before she mentioned it. She saved the crisp edge of the cornbread for me because she knew I liked it. I began asking how she felt and waiting long enough to hear the answer. She began sitting beside me on the porch after the children were asleep. Some evenings we spoke. Some evenings we listened to the insects in the field. After nearly a year, Miriam told me what had happened inside her after the birth. She said she had felt as if her body no longer belonged to her. Every touch reminded her of pain, fear, and the hours when she thought she might die. She said she knew I had not caused that pain, but she had begun to fear that I would demand closeness before she was ready. The more she feared it, the more ashamed she became. The more ashamed she became, the less she could speak. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted to tell her I had never intended to frighten her. But intention is not the same as what another person experiences. So I listened. That night, I told her I was sorry. Not for being a husband, not for wanting closeness. I was sorry that my anger had made our home feel unsafe to her. I was sorry I had gone to the bishop, hoping to bring back an order against her instead of trying to understand her. We did not return to the same bedroom that week, or that month. Trust is not repaired by a speech. It is repaired when the next morning matches the words spoken the night before. For 19 years, I kept the bishop's instruction in front of me. Never force, never threaten, never shame. Never use faith as a weapon against the person you promised to protect. There were years when Miriam and I were close again, and years when illness or grief put distance between us. There were seasons when we shared one room, and seasons when I returned to the small bed by the kitchen because she needed space. Each time the same question came back to me. Am I trying to preserve our marriage, or am I trying to win? The hardest year came after our second daughter died from an infection at 23. Grief changed the shape of our house. Miriam stopped singing while she worked. She left our daughter's shawl hanging behind the pantry door for almost 2 years. During that time, she could not bear much closeness from anyone. Even the grandchildren overwhelmed her. I knew more by then than I had known as a younger man, but knowing does not remove loneliness. I missed my wife even while she sat 3 feet away from me. There were evenings when I resented the life we had been given. I would go to the barn after supper and stay too long, pretending to check a harness that did not need checking. One night, Miriam found me there. Snow was blowing through the gap under the door. She stood beside the empty stall and said, "You have never made my sorrow pay a debt to you." That was the one sentence she gave me, and it carried 19 years inside it. I had thought obedience meant enduring what I had been denied. I understand it differently now. Obedience was learning that my wife was not something given to me for my comfort. She was a person entrusted to my care, just as I was entrusted to hers. Marriage did not make her less able to refuse. It made her refusal more important for me to hear, because no one else lived close enough to see what it cost her to say it. People sometimes ask whether the bishop's counsel saved our marriage. I cannot answer that with certainty. Advice only becomes real through the choices made after it. The bishop did not live in our house. He did not lie awake in the small room. He did not carry Miriam's grief or my resentment, but he gave me a boundary at the moment I was most likely to cross one. He reminded me that leadership without gentleness becomes domination, and that faith used without mercy becomes pride. Miriam and I have now been married for more than 3 decades. The clock in our front room has been repaired twice. The small bed beside the kitchen is still there, though grandchildren use it more often than I do. Miriam still keeps her hands folded when she has something difficult to say. I still have to quiet the part of me that prepares a defense before she finishes speaking. 19 years of obedience did not make me a perfect husband. It made me slower to claim that being a husband entitled me to anything. It taught me that love is not proven by how much authority a man can exercise. It is proven by what he refuses to take. That is the clearest thing I can tell you. When someone you love says no, the first task is not to overcome the refusal. The first task is to understand what the refusal is protecting. You may discover fear, pain, exhaustion, grief, or a wound you did not know was there. Listening does not guarantee the answer you want. It does give the other person room to remain whole. If these stories from Amish life help you see marriage, faith, and family from a different side, you are welcome to subscribe. And I would like to ask you one honest question. Have you ever had to give up being right in order to keep someone you loved feeling safe?